If you enjoy these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks. Now back to the video. What are some declassified government documents that are surprisingly terrifying? When the Space Shuttle Challenger was destroyed, it was reported that all 7 astronauts were killed instantly. It was revealed decades later that some, if not all of the astronauts survived the initial explosion, as the cockpit cabin had enough protection to not be breached. For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, they were awake and aware as they plummeted toward the Atlantic Ocean. Understandably, NASA knew that the news of their terrifying death would have crippled the space program even more than it already was. We looked at this in flight school and pretty much, there's evidence to support that the crew was still running their procedures even after it was obvious shit hit the fan. They didn't die accepting their fate, they died astronauts. That's something to be admired. The same happened with Columbia. The crew were working the systems to try to troubleshoot and recover even as the space shuttle was burning up and breaking apart around them. The crew cabin was the last piece to break apart. Devil Eyes. The plan after 9/11 to make figurines that look like Osama bin Laden and give them to kids in South Asia. After it's left in the sun for a certain amount of time, its face would peel off to reveal a demon-like visage with red skin, green eyes, and black markings. Basically a demon. The objective was to scare kids and their parents so bin Laden and Al-Qaeda would lose support. You should watch The Holy Mountain. In it they talk about knowing they will have to go to war with a country in 15 years. They make comic books and toys with a villain that looks like that other race. They also make ipecac type medicine the same color as the skin of that race. All sorts of things to prepare kids to hate a particular races by the time they are of military age and the war is fought. Project Sunshine, where the US government bought remains of dead infants to test for radiation. When they took limbs from them, the parents were never told. One mother wasn't allowed to dress her daughter for her funeral because doctors had removed her legs and didn't want her to find out. Jeffrey Dahmer's full confession, a couple of 100 pages of pure madness. Necrophilia, dismemberment, skinning, lobotomy, body part preservation, cannibalism. Dahmer became pretty close to his interrogating detectives, Dennis Murphy and Patrick Kennedy, and provided a lot of detail to them. A lot of it in a pretty candid, offhand manner. Dahmer should have been prosecuted for what he did in the army. Source. For capture began the day he and Dahmer, an army medic, were put into a room together. The assaults began at once and, eventually, he leapt from the 3rd floor window to escape. I had probably been raped 8 to 10 times, I don't know. He was tying me to the bunk with motor pool rope. He took all my clothing from me. He would either beat me before he raped me or he would beat me after. Jesus fucking Christ. How does that go unpunished? After the My Lai massacre, killing of around 400-500 innocent civilians in Vietnam after an army troop killed an entire village, the US government established a group to investigate other war crimes like this occurring in Vietnam. The Vietnam War Crimes Working Group. They found 28 massacres of equal or greater magnitude than My Lai that the public was unaware of, so literally thousands of innocent people killed by US soldiers. The information has since been reclassified, but there were several journal articles on it when it was first released. I took a military ethics class hosted by a prof who spent many years in Vietnam as a Marine captain. He personally experienced a colonel who operated with a doctrine called count the meat. Basically, the success of an operation was dependent upon how many bodies it made. The presumption was that they were all enemies. The sad thing is that is how the Vietnam War worked. America was operating on a strategy of attempting to kill as many VC and NVA as possible, rather than to secure ground and capture territory like in previous wars, working under the assumption that if they killed them all, there wouldn't be an insurgency anymore. Operation Midnight Climax. The government hired sex workers to dose Johns with LSD for research purposes, so to speak. Midnight Climax sounds like a porno. It basically was. One US bomber accidentally dropped a nuclear bomb a short distance from a major US city, can't remember which, but luckily it didn't detonate. Off the coast of Georgia. They still haven't found it. No, they know exactly where it is. It would just be more dangerous to retrieve it than to just leave it alone. It's off the coast of Savannah. Fallout 5 in Savannah confirmed. Let's start it. Good idea. Pussy Blaster 69 420. My hometown was littered with radioactive waste by the federal government as part of the Manhattan Project. Then we wonder why cancer and thyroid conditions are the norm. I grew up 2 miles from the Lake Ontario Ordnance Works site, and my dad grew up on 89th Street in Niagara Falls in the 40s. He says that he remembers sitting on the train tracks as a kid watching the hooker chemical trucks bring in 55 gallons drums to the Love Canal. That whole area was contaminated with all sorts of nasty stuff. So what did they do? They bulldozed it over and built houses on it, of course. Then in the 70s, when people were noticing toxic sludge in their basements, kids' feet were being literally burned by the high levels of phosphorus in the ground, and people were getting sick, they acted like they knew nothing. Eventually people sued and the whole area was evacuated. They tried to clean it up, but they basically put tons of dirt and clay over the area as a cap, and it's all fenced off. You can see it when you drive east on the Niagara Falls Expressway to Towanda, for the Lewiston storage site, also known as the NFSS Niagara Falls storage site. I've read documents where they had hazardous storage barrels sitting exposed to the elements, with seepage and all that. Again, they've covered everything with clay to stop it, but it's already in the ground. The bad thing is that there's a large elementary and high school, Lewiston Porter, about 2 miles from the site, which is actually on property that used to be part of the site but was never used and was sold to the county. Needless to say, the cancer rate among long-term staff and teachers is higher than average. I'm glad to have finally moved away. In East Germany, a committed freedom fighter and her husband had dealt with having her home raided while she was away, being arrested on the way to protests and all sorts of state-sponsored harassment. After the wall fell, she was able to read the documents the Stasi had kept on her and found out her own husband was an undercover agent and had written many reports on her activities with a bloodless banality. Suspiciously, she always has a headache when I propose having sex. Possible capitalist plot. She's always volunteering to take the children to school on Mondays. Possibility of capitalist indoctrination of our children. Must interrogate them later. Operation Northwoods, a plan for a false flag operation that came from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Department of Defense in 1962 and given to JFK, who turned it down. The plan called for the CIA to commit terrorist actions against US civilians across the United States and frame Cuba, allowing us the right to invade and depose Castro and the communist government there. It was declassified and can be found online at the JFK library. Terrifying that no one knows or seems to care that this was suggested by our government to the president. My high school English teacher mandated that I read this. I didn't understand it at the time, but he was responding to my question I posed him. As an airborne vet, why do you seem so jaded in regards to US history and politics? Still one of my favorite teachers to this day. He and I were able to go into a lot other awesome things the US has done. Surprised no one has mentioned the Panama Papers. They've been out for a while, but there's been little coverage of them. TLDR of them. Lots of money laundering that was tracked pointed to major governments and global businesses. Edit. Amazon Prime has a series called The Giant Beast that is the global economy. They talk about the Panama Papers in a couple episodes. Also Paradise Papers. The elite of this world money laundering and essentially hoarding wealth. I wonder why the media coverage was super slim. HMMMMM. We are planning to cut all homeless people in half in 2025. The UK government. That's the best example of bad wording I have ever seen. Yeah, sure, this would result in twice as many homeless people. Not declassified but leaked. Operation Yellowhammer. The government tried to say it was old but it had an August date on it. Dude, New English is nowhere good enough to comprehend the wiki article. Could you please summarize? It's the UK government's plan for the eventuality of a no-deal Brexit. Basically, life in the UK would be turned upside down for a few months. Food and medical shortages are expected. The royal family might be evacuated to a safe place. Police will have too much on their hands to investigate crime. etc. Edit. It's not a worst case scenario. It's a realistic assessment. Not really terrifying but fucked up. Operation Paperclip, where after World War II the US government took Nazi scientists and shipped them to America to do science. Some of them came straight from Nuremberg cells, the most noteworthy being Werner von Braun. Von Braun built the V2 rockets with Jewish slave labor. Every day they would execute the 5 slowest workers in front of the other workers to incentive them to work harder. Once he came to America, we shipped him to Huntsville, Alabama, where he built the Saturn V, the rocket used in the Apollo program, and got us to the moon. I always thought it was insane that Werner von Braun was born within a decade of the Wright brothers' first flight, then sent men to the moon on a rocket in his 50s. Thanks for making it to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a good day and see you next time.